Okay, so this video is going to cover the first part of Chapter 9 of Fundamentals of English Grammar. If you want to follow along in your book and make notes along with the video, you can do that. You can open up to page 229. Okay, so starting off, this chapter is talking about making comparisons, and this will be useful because the next essay that we do will be actually a comparison essay. So some of these things, some of the things that we learn here, you'll be able to use in your writing. So the first one is making comparisons with as. So if we take a look at this one, we say Jen is not as old as Emma. We have the two photos there. But let's take a closer look at some other examples. So in this one, the boots and shoes are size 10, so the boots are as large as. The chef cuts the onion as finely as he can. So when we're using as plus an adjective or an adverb, what we're basically saying is that the two things are the same. So in the first one, we say that the boots are as large as the shoes. We're saying they're both the same size. In the second one, it says the chef cuts the onion as finely as he can. This isn't really a comparison, but what it's saying, it means as small as he can possibly do it. We can also add not, and so just as means the same, when we add not there, it means that they're not the same. So in this picture, you have two photographs, one of Everest, which is 8,848 meters, and one of Annapurna, another mountain, which is 8,091 meters, or miles. Must be miles. I don't know what that M stands for. But in this case, we say Annapurna is not as tall as Everest. So we're making a comparison, but we're pointing out a difference between the two. We can also say Annapurna is not as high as Everest, or we could say Annapurna isn't quite as high as. Now the difference between not as and quite as is that quite as means that it's a small difference between the two. So in this case, we're talking about 800 miles or 800, yeah, it must be miles, between the two. So it's not a huge difference. However, when we say not in the last example, you say Fuji isn't nearly as high as, you can see that Everest is 8,800 and Fuji is 3,700. So not nearly as actually means a big difference. So we have three things here. We have not as, which means that they're not the same. It could be a close difference or a big difference. But when we say not quite as, it means that there's a small difference. And when we say not nearly as, we're talking about a big difference. Okay? And this is what I covered. We can also say the boots are just as large as the shoes. And what this is saying is that they're the same. So we can also say the skates are nearly or almost as large as the shoes. So in the first case, where we say just as large as, the shoes and the boots are exactly the same. When we say nearly or almost as large as, what we're saying is that it's very close. There's a slight difference, but a very, very small difference. So in this case, we have size 11, size 10. So just means exactly the same, and almost or nearly means it's very close to being the same. So let's take a look at this practice. An antelope can run blank fast blank a cheetah. So if we look at the speeds here, they're both 95 kilometers per hour, so it's going to be as. Now one of the things I put on the questions that I asked you was what was wrong with a sentence, and in that sentence the thing that was missing is one of the as's, and the reason I put that is that it's a common ESL mistake for people to say an antelope can run fast as a cheetah, but you need to have both as's when you're using this formation. So here's a negative. We have a leopard at 90 and a cheetah at 95. So if we think about this, is this a big difference or a small difference? So we're saying a leopard can run nearly as fast as. We could also say almost as fast as. Now here we have a negative, okay? So we would say a leopard can't run quite as fast as. So we have a negative there, so we're talking about a small difference, so we use the word quite. So moving on to the next one, this is on page 223. The difference between a comparative and a superlative. Alright, so we have this one. A feather is lighter than a brick. Feathers and bricks are lighter than horses and trucks. Horses are more beautiful than trucks. Okay? Now these are all comparatives. We have two examples of comparatives here. We have lighter than, and we also have more beautiful than. The comparative part of this in the first one is lighter, and in the second one it's more beautiful. But you'll notice that in both cases it's followed by than. So in this case here we're looking at a superlative. So the purple box is the longest of all the boxes. The brown box is the biggest box in the group. So while a comparative is comparing two things, a superlative is comparing is really talking about one thing in a group, the best or the most whatever of something in a group. So a comparative just means between two things, whereas a superlative would be between more than two things. So here we can say Everest is the most massive mountain in the world. Okay. When we're making the superlative, we have two ways to make it. We can make it with EST, and we can also make it with most. And we'll talk about when we use EST and when we use most in the next one. But the thing to remember is that whether we use the EST at the end or we use the most, in both cases we have to put the article the before the superlative. And this is something that ESL students often leave out. You forget to put the there. Okay, so let's look at this one. Is this correct or incorrect? Jazz is the more beautiful music in New Orleans. This is incorrect. The problem is that more is used just with comparatives, and it's also not used with the. So it should be jazz is the most beautiful music in New Orleans. What about this? The most famous jazz in the world is from New Orleans. This one is correct, right? We have the, and then we're using most. What about this one? I like jazz more better than rap or salsa. So in this case it's incorrect. The problem here is that you actually have two comparatives. You're using both more and also the ER form. And in English we don't do that. We don't use more and better and more and whatever ER form of it. So let's look at some of the rules for how do we decide whether we're going to use ER or whether we're going to use more or whether we're going to use EST or whether we're going to use more. Alright, so the first group, and this is on page 235, the first group that we have is one-syllable adjectives. Now a syllable is the vowel sound in a word. So a word like old is one syllable. There's only one vowel sound there. So we have old becomes older and the oldest. Okay, so anytime we have a one-syllable adjective, we're going to be adding ER or EST. Here's another example. Wise, wiser, the wisest. Okay, we add ER or add EST when it's one syllable. Now, when we get into two syllables, we actually have a little bit of variety. For most two-syllable words, right, we're just going to add more or the most. Okay, so famous has two syllables, and we'll say more famous, the most famous. Here's another example. Pleasant, more pleasant, the most pleasant. Okay, this is for the majority of two-syllable words. However, there's some exceptions, so let's look at that. So there's some two-syllable adjectives that can actually be used with either the ER or the more, and either the EST or the most. So we can say cleverer, the more cleverer, cleverest, the most clever, gentler, gentlest, more gentle, most gentle. Okay, friendlier, more friendly, friendliest, the most friendly. Now, the rule for this, in the book, it gives you a number of other examples that you can choose to memorize. But generally, what the rule for this is that if you have an adjective that's 2 syllables, and the second syllable is le, so for example, gentle, you can use either form. The other one is when you have a 2-syllable adjective and the second one is er, like clever. You can use either form. The other rule is that when you have a 2-syllable adjective where the stress is on the first syllable. So friendly is an example of that. It's friendly, not friendly. Another example that's on there is like angry. It's angry, not angry. Okay. What else do they have here? Quiet. It's quiet, not quiet. Polite, not polite. Is the other rule for that. Okay. But the thing to remember if you're confused by that is that if this is a 2-syllable adjective, it's always going to be okay to use the more and the most, like we had in the previous one. Okay. Now then we have this group of 2-syllable adjectives, and these are 2-syllable adjectives where the second syllable is just a y. So in these cases we don't say more busy, even though it's 2 syllables. We say busier and the busiest, not more pretty, but prettier and the prettiest. And what you're going to do is you're going to change the y to an I and then add the er or the est. Okay. So those are the 3 groups of 2-syllable adjectives. Now, when we're talking about more than 2 or 3 or more, we're always going to be adding more or the most. So important becomes more important, the most important, fascinating, more fascinating, the most fascinating. Okay. And then there's some exceptions where we have a couple of irregular adjectives. So good is better, the best. Bad is worse, the worst. Okay, so these are some irregular ones that you need to learn. These are the 2 big ones, good and bad. With adjectives that end in ly, we're going to use more and the most. So more carefully, the most carefully, more slowly, the most slowly. Okay, we use more and most. There are a couple of 1-syllable adverbs like fast, and this other one hard. In that case, just like with 1-syllable adjectives, we're going to add the er or the est. There's also a couple of irregular adverbs, so like well, badly, and far. So well becomes better, the best, badly becomes worse, the worst, and far becomes farther or further, farthest and furthest. Okay. If you're interested, the book does explain what the difference is between farther and further. You can go ahead and explore that if you're interested. It's not something that I'm going to focus on, though. All right, so which of these is correct? Greta is messy, but Oscar is even messier. So we have a 2-syllable adjective, but it ends in a y, so we're going to use er. The market is 4 miles from Rosa's house and 5 miles from my house. I live farther or further from the market than Rosa does. Okay. I have many pleasant memories from childhood. The most pleasant memory is going to the zoo with my grandfather. Okay. So moving on to completing a comparative. Now this is something that's probably going to sound really strange to you in some of the things that we talk about here. But sometimes we can make a comparison without using more. So we say his hair is curlier than mine, than her hair. So here's another example. She's taller than her husband. She's taller than he is. Okay, or she's taller than him. Okay. In formal English, we need to use a subject pronoun after this. So if you're writing this down, we need to actually write she's taller than he is, or she's taller than he. In spoken English, we can use the object pronoun. She's taller than him. Okay. She studies more than he does. She got a better exam grade than he did. We have than plus the subject plus the auxiliary verb. His hair is shorter than hers. Her hair is longer than his. Okay, we can also use it with a possessive pronoun. So if we look at this one, Mr. Polos can carry heavy boxes. I can't. So he is much stronger than I am. Okay, but informally we could say he is much stronger than me. Okay, so you're going to hear, more commonly, you're going to hear people say he's much stronger than me, but in writing it should be the subject pronoun. So in this one, his arms are stronger than mine are. Okay, I went through that one really quick intentionally because my focus, I'm not going to focus too much on that one table, but I wanted to just go over it quickly. So there's two more tables here that we need to talk about. One is this 9-5 when we're modifying comparatives. So when we talk about modifying comparative, it means that we're adding some meaning to the comparative. So in this case we have my car is very old and they walk very slowly on icy roads. Very is a word that's used to modify most adjectives and adverbs. Okay. However, we can't use very to modify a comparative. So in this one it says my car is very older than yours is incorrect. We can't use very with an older, which is a comparative. It's the ER form, or with more slowly in the second one. In either case, it's not appropriate to use very with that. And again, it's in here because it's a common ESL mistake. Okay, so very can't be used with comparatives, either adjective or adverbs. What we use instead is we can use a much, a lot, or far, and they basically have the same meaning as what you mean when you say very. So Erica is much smarter than I am, or Dan reads much faster than he used to. Okay, these ones are used with comparative adjectives, and they're also used with comparative adverbs. Now much, a lot, and far, what they mean is a great deal more. A great deal more, okay? But we can also modify with a little bit, or a little bit, which means a small amount more. So let's take a look at these ones. So the trees are blank more colorful. So if we look at more colorful, that's a comparative. So can we use very with a comparative? We can't. We have to use much. What about this one? The weather is blank warmer. So warmer is a comparative. So can we use very with it? And we can't. We have to use a lot. Here, the weather can be blank warm in the spring. So in this case, warm is an adjective. So can we use very with it? Yeah, we can. Okay? We can't use far in that case. All right, and here's the last one here, where we're talking about with less than and not as. So in this case, Nico is not as happy as Amanda. So here's some more examples. A toy, and this is on page 241, a toy is less educational than a book. A toy is not as educational as a book. Basically, these two things mean the same thing. It's just formulated in a different way. Okay? Here we say a child is not as wise as an adult, but it is incorrect to say a child is less wise than an adult. Okay? Here's the reason why. Okay? With one-syllable words, with one-syllable adjectives or adverbs, we can't use not as. So, for example, with wise is just one syllable, so we can't use not as. We have to use less. For two-syllable words, we can use either form. So if we take a look at this one, the adjective is old. So which one can we use? we can only use not as, because less can't be used with one syllable one. Okay? A lion cub is, now here we have strong. How many syllables is that? It's one. So again, it has to be not as. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end here. If you hadn't had the chance to take a look at the answers for the questions over this section, go ahead and do that. And we'll have the quiz in class tomorrow. And if you have any questions, please bring those questions with you to class. Take care. Bye.